Austin's Wadane Elementary is just one of more than 170 schools across Texas facing closure in the last few years. KXAN's Nabil Remadna joins me now, going inside the investigation to look at this troubling trend. Welcome.
Thank you for having me here.
So for families whose schools are closing, what happens next? How much say do parents actually have in what happens to their child's campus?
Yeah, parents, have pushed back a lot. We saw that locally here with Austin ISD, but unfortunately, I think, when there is a state takeover, when there is a closure to a school, the parents have to just kind of go with the flow or go somewhere else. I think we're going to see some enrollment numbers coming out very soon across AISD specifically to see what exactly happened. Maybe some of the parents took their kids to private school, charter schools, things like that. But, there is a lot of uncertainty, especially with, what we're seeing with budget deficits. A lot of districts across the state are seeing deficits where they're cutting down those numbers, trying to cut back on spending. And specifically here in Austin ISD, this is kind of the first district where we've seen years and years of no funding coming from the state. And now they're making these tough decisions where parents are kind of having to go with the flow with the uncertainty of what's coming next. As far as say, as we were talking about from parents, there has been a lot of backlash. We're seeing a lot of parents come together locally. We've seen some groups kind of push back, fearing a state takeover. But yeah, that's something that's on a lot of parents' minds right now. And I think the future is kind of uncertain if you are a parent or a student in any of these districts in Texas.
More broadly, are there signs that this wave of closures could continue or even accelerate over the next few years?
I think there's a number of factors. We look in Austin ISD, they're facing a budget deficit. There's inflation going on. It costs a lot of money to operate these schools. And with populations kind of moving around, you're seeing maybe some older populations stay in some neighborhoods where there's not a lot of turnover. So schools in those areas might be having less, students in the system. That's with Austin ISD. We saw some of these schools in, some parts of the school district that had maybe half the student population. So they're spending a lot more money to operate that school. We saw those consolidations. But yeah, I think that basically there's a lot of uncertainty with what we're seeing here. A lot of these school districts are facing a lot of different challenges.
So we found that the 170 plus campuses that have closed across Texas in recent years, but we also said that the number may not be complete. What do we not know yet about that number?
I think there is a lot of questions, and I'll keep saying this, uncertainty, because there is a lot of uncertainty right now. We're seeing the 170 that you mentioned, but we've heard school superintendents or district superintendents say that the future is unknown. Will they have to cut more? A lot of that will come down to what happens in session. Will they get more, funding? The basic student allotment right now about $6,200. And many people that I've spoke to, education experts, advocates, have said they need about $1,800 more. They recently got about $50 more, but what does that do with rising prices, inflation, everything going on? So I think it's uncertain. What happens next? Each district dealing with kind of different situations, but we are starting to see more districts dealing with what Austin ISD has had to do. Maybe on maybe a smaller scope, not as many schools closing, but Pflugerville ISD next year, they'll have some closures. We saw Eanes ISD a couple of years ago, they had a school closure. So I think you might see some more closures. If that has to do with funding or other things, there's a number of factors that really go into that. But I think it's only time will tell what we see moving ahead.
Yeah, what are we seeing in districts like Austin that could be warning signs for other districts that may be facing closures?
I think first off is just the closures, programs being cut. Their hands are really tied from what the superintendent said with what they can do. If they don't have more funding, and I know it always comes back to funding and people say manage better, things like that, but when you have inflation, when you have all of these, outside things going on, the district's hands are tied. They have to make sure that kids are getting an education. They have to go in and, make security measures, upgrades, things like that. So there's a lot working with that. So again, I think it goes back to session and what, lawmakers will decide.
What should parents and taxpayers be watching for to know whether a school closing is actually helping fix a district's financial problems?
I think that's going to take time to tell. You know, next year, are we in the same budget shortfall in AISD? I think that's the perfect kind of example to look at to see what happens. Did these school closures work out? You know, they're talking about selling some of the properties, maybe renting out some of the properties. Did these cuts that they made and the plans that they have work out? That'll really be the thing that people look at to see if these changes, you know, helped or not. But again, just the uncertainty of everything, it's going to take time to see if these cuts actually work.
So I want to pivot a little bit from closures because Austin isn't just facing closures. There's also a looming threat of a state takeover. So I know we have talked about this week Burnett and Webb now receiving their 5th consecutive F ratings, those schools, and state accountability ratings. So what does that put at stake for AISD at this point?
Yeah, a lot of eyes were on this, a lot of people waiting. And I will say first off that this will be a while before we know exactly what happens with the TEA takeover. But with that 5th consecutive F from both Webb and Burnett, that means the TEA is required to take action. There are a number of things that can happen here. They could just shut down the schools, they could put in another superintendent or board of trustees. But you know, it's really something that is a concern for people. A lot of parents not happy with the TEA takeover, and you know, so I think there's still, you know, some questions that need to be answered.
Well, as you mentioned, it could be a while, but we've seen what a state takeover could look like in another large district, Houston, where the state actually replaced the locally elected school board and has overseen the district since 2023. So what can Austin families learn from what's happening in Houston?
So obviously 2023, that's when the TEA came in, and there have been some improvements there. Some parents have pushed back saying, you know, maybe the improvements were coming before the TEA stepped in. But, you know, the TEA, they improved the school from, or sorry, excuse me, you know, they've seen a lot of those failing schools increase their A to F rating. So the results were better. So I think there is, you know, some improvements that you can look at, but also there were some departures, you know, teachers, families leaving because of this. So I mean, I think you have to just take it with kind of a grain of salt and say, we've got to look at this over a number of years to see, you know, 2023 to now, that's quite a while. But I think moving forward, only time can tell what this looks at. I mean, the scope of things, you really have to get into details and see statistics to see what exactly happened.
I know you've looked at what this could possibly play out as, with Wichita Falls offering an example. That district faced the threat of a takeover, but it avoided taking those steps by addressing its struggling campus that it had. What does that tell us about what options Austin may still have?
Yeah, there's a number of options that can happen. The thing in Austin ISD is you saw a lot of improvements, a lot of schools improving their grades. Dobie was one of the 3 with Burnett and Webb that was on this turnaround plan to make sure that they got an increased grade to about a D. That didn't happen for the other 2 schools, but Dobie made improvements, and we actually saw a number of schools in the district improve their ratings quite a bit. I think there is some room to kind of look at this. It'll come down to Commissioner Morath on what he wants to do at the end of the day. Again, the TEA is required to take action with those 2 consecutive Fs, but I think there is some, you know, positivity with the fact that these schools did increase, Austin ISD making some changes and improving. But again, at the end of the day, you never know what that, you know, decision will be. Will they close the 2 schools that failed and keep the superintendent? Will they, you know, replace the board of trustees? That's the question that remains. There are a number of options that can happen. I did talk to Superintendent Matias right before school started and said, you know, what is the next step? What is going to happen after this? He said December is when they should find out kind of what the decision is, but right now he said they are laser focused on still improving the students' grades across the campus, making sure students have everything they need, and specifically at those 2 schools that did receive that 5th F rating, as well as some of the other schools. But yeah, he said it's, back to business as usual, and at the end of the day, whatever that decision is, they'll have to just kind of go with the flow.
How unusual is this looming takeover threat that's happening in Austin, actually, when you compare it to other districts in the state? Is this something that we're seeing happening more and more, or is this just a one-time thing that we're seeing at some districts?
I think there's a lot of things going on in public education right now. You have about 8 schools that the TEA has stepped into and taken over, and big school districts. Houston, obviously, Fort Worth. We've seen just large areas that have had failing schools year after year after year. Some have asked, how did we get to this point? How do we have 5 failing F grades? Could we have done something sooner? But it is something that I think you are seeing more now, especially with everything going on in the public education realm. Some people have said, schools and districts have become political battlegrounds. They want, parents want this to be a place to learn, but there's a lot more going on right now in public education. And I think that, a lot of eyes are on what's going on, but TEA takeover is something that I've talked about more, I think, over the last few years than I've ever talked about before.
So putting these two topics together, state takeovers and the threat of school closures, what does that tell us about the future of public education in Texas?
The future of public education right now is very volatile. I think there's a lot of things that can happen. I think the positive thing is you are seeing some improvements to the grades. Again, I think you're going to have to kind of look at the analytics. You're going to have to look closely at what shaped these school districts. Was it the superintendent and trustees that made tough decisions? Was it this TEA takeover? There's a lot to talk about, and I know I've said it a lot. I'm going to say it again. There is a lot of uncertainty right now in public education, with a lot of decisions coming up, and a lot of eyes will be on session when that comes up to see what changes for public schools, because I think there's a lot of upset parents, teachers, and some people are leaving districts all over. So yeah, a lot of uncertainty right now.
And no doubt we'll be there to cover it. Thank you so much, Nabil. Thanks for spending time with us. I'm Josh Hinkle. You can catch Inside the Investigation, part of our weekly program Cause and Effect, every Friday afternoon on air at 4:30 on KXAN, or explore the full program online under the Investigative tab at KXAN.com. You can watch all extended editions of Inside the Investigation on the KXAN Plus Smart TV app, or listen to audio versions on the KXAN Investigates podcast, wherever you get podcasts.